In the last video, we have seen how to create credentials using the API method, and in this video, we are going to store those credentials in a DB and let user authenticate themselves and log into those accounts and authorize to access some APIs. Okay, so we are going to cover all those things in this video, and if you're already familiar with Jwt Authentication and how to store data in the MongoDB, you can skip this tutorial. For the rest of the people who want to learn this, we will be using an ORM library called Mongoose to connect to the MongoDB so that we can store and retrieve data into the MongoDB database. Okay, so first I'll install the Mongoose using this npm install Mongoose. Once that is done, we need to get the Docker Compose script for running the MongoDB from our local machine. Okay, so I'll just go to MongoDB Docker website where we can see we got a sample script mentioned somewhere here. Yeah, so this is the script that will be used to run the MongoDB. Okay, so when we run Docker Compose up, it will run the MongoDB by pulling the MongoDB image if it does not exist in the local already. Okay, so I'm just want to run this and expose the Docker, like the MongoDB Docker at 270.174 port. Also, we'll need to modify our code a bit to make the MongoDB as a dependency for our application to start properly. Okay, without database connection, we don't want to start our application. So we'll make this a function asynchronous, and we'll modify this bit more to have a try catch method. So if there is a issue with connection or getting the port allocated for us, we'll just say something happened. Okay, and we'll be pasting the method to connect to the MongoDB. Okay, so by default we are connecting to localhost 270.10.17 and test database. We'll see how. Okay, so as you can see, the Docker version of the MongoDB is running, and when we start the to start the API server, it is actually running, and the database connection was also successful. So we just rename the collection to use to win-cell. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to create is like a user schema to store our details, like the user details. So we're going to store username, name, password, and private public key. Okay, so also we are going to create a model. Okay, so that we can create a collection over there in our database. Okay, and store data in this specific model. Okay, so here we are mentioning the table name and the schema to follow, or like the collection name and the schema to follow. Okay, and then we are going to use a tool like library called Joy, which we'll be using to validate all the inputs that we are receiving from API. Okay, so there are libraries like HappyJS, Nest.js that has this Joy function built in, or class validation built in to validate the data. But here we are going to like create a normal express.js application from scratch. So I'm not using any frameworks as of such. Okay, so we can mention what are the required parameters and what's the minimum value and what's the validation that we need to perform on the password. So all those things are mentioned over here. It's optional to include this, but I've copied the template. Okay, so here we are going to import the Joy validator that we have mentioned in another file. Okay, under validations folder, and we are going to access the method called validate, and we'll pass the request body, and this will return whether it's valid or invalid data that we receive in the request body. If there is a error found in the valid.error, okay, we are going to return, okay, so they found error. We are not sending the proper data for our API. Okay, even though we haven't created a Swagger document to mention that, we are throwing that, like we are expecting these properties. Okay, so when you hit the endpoint, you know, okay, so these details are required. The next thing that we are going to do is like, let's check if the username is already taken by someone else. So for that, whatever the username we are receiving, we will check in the database whether that user is already exists with this username. Okay, so we'll respond, okay, 409, there is a user already exists with this username. Okay, so that method will return here. We'll also be modifying this, like I'll be taking out the values from the object using this method. Okay, just for coding like enhancement. Okay, then we also take the name, password, all those sort of things will be stored. Okay, so now we need a public key. Since we are only returning private key over here, we need to modify this method to return public key also. Okay, so I'm going to return private key string, which is hex of the private key we created now. And for public key, we need to modify a bit more because I don't think this will work because like the last time when I checked, it didn't work. Let us check. I'm not sure about public key value. Okay, the private keys will be written in hex format. Okay, when we run this function, okay, we are supposed to return the username that we are storing in the DB. Okay, also the public key. Okay, so no, we don't need to return the private key anymore to the user. So I think that's it for the API changes. Okay, so we are going to register a new user with the name John, username John, and we got a public key. Okay, so in this public key, we see that it's a number array, but because it's an event array, okay, we are expecting a string to be stored. Okay, so what could be done is like, okay, since we are having a signer method, okay, that signer method creates an instance of our private key. Okay, and using that method, we will be able to retrieve the public key. Okay, like here in the transaction code. Okay, so I'm gonna refactor this code a bit to move this get signer method as a variable. Okay, so that we can access this function inside the file itself. Okay, earlier when we have the exports.get user get signer, we'll not be able to access the function. Now I think when we move this function a bit up, like upper level, we'll be having no issues accessing the get signer function. Okay, so what I'm going to do is like I'll pass the private key of the newly created user, and obtain a signer method. Okay, so once we obtain the signer, we'll be able to use the signer dot get public key dot as x method to um, get the public key of the user. Okay, so as hex. So once we are done with this, we don't really going to use this two functions anymore because we are not doing any signing check. Once this is done, we are going to go back to our same function, the API controller. And I think when we create a new user, we already taken this name. When we create a new user, it will return as a public key, okay, which is going to be the same on the Sawtooth. Okay, so now we have this. The next thing that we are going to do is like add Jwt authentication. Okay, so when there is a user registered, we are not going to do that. So we need a login this user method. Okay, so when there is someone logging in with the correct credentials, we are going to create them a token. Okay, so to create a token, I'm going to use the JWT sign. The first parameter is going to be the payload. The second parameter is going to be the secret that we use to create this token. The third parameter is going to be an expiry time. In it's like I have mentioned the seconds. So this parameter will create a token and will return the token if the login is valid. Okay, so we are also going to write a validation for this, and this is going to be the same thing. We are expecting both username and password, and the same validation that we have written in the register, we are going to do that, but this time it's going to be login user and login user schema. So login user schema dot validate will validate the request body to check whether the username and password exists there, and here it should be a valid data, so that check is done. So we'll prepare a login check, like login request over in the postman. Okay, let's check if the API is validating our payload properly. So it's not even allowing extra properties now. Anyway, it's a good thing. Okay, so we got an error. Okay, so the thing is, we are not supposed to pass just string and have expiry time for that. We should have it as an object. Okay, when we sign it. So we'll keep the same thing, request you body username, and the one more error I made is like we should not return the response. We should response.json the response. Okay, so now this is like set, we got the token, and the next thing we need to do is like a general validator to validate all our API calls. So if there is an API call to the slash API, okay, so this authenticate token function will validate the header. Okay, so basically what it does is like it will take the header, it will split the bearer and the token and take the token, then it will validate the token secret against this token, and whatever the method, like whether that is a successful decoding, means that it is like a valid user. Okay, else it will just respond with 401 error. Okay, so the login token that we got from the earlier API call, I'm going to use it here, and we'll call the yeah. So we are receiving okay response. Okay, so everything works out. Okay, here we are not validating the user exists or not. So if the user doesn't exist for the pair that we are trying to find, we should throw error saying, okay, username or password is incorrect. Okay, we're not supposed to see what is incorrect. Okay, so I'm also adding the password filter over here. We are not hashing the password yet. I'm not planning to hash the password yet. So also we are going to use the sanitized value that comes out of joy validator. Okay, so some minor tweaks. Okay, so these are all optional stuff that I'm doing here. So I'm just making the code look so little better. It's not a like a super perfect code. I'm just making it a little better for you guys to understand. Okay, so user. Okay, whatever we user we have retrieved, we'll be able to get the public key out of that. Okay, so right now this token has username and public key. So when we log in again, we will see the token has increased in size because it's already having that public key also. We'll update the token over here in the collection, and we'll send the API again. Okay, right now we are receiving username and public key, and that checks out. And the only thing that is pending now is like creating a transactions related endpoint and call the hit the smart contracts, which we are going to develop next. Okay, so in the next video, we are going to create smart contracts that will have all the functions that we are planning for the WinCell application. Okay, so until next time, tada bye bye from Code Logs.